There's a certain type of state that all humans can get into. And if we can get into this state, then they bring us very high levels of happiness, engagement, and enjoyment. And in this video, I want to talk about what these states are and how you can get them. So there's a Hungarian psychologist called Mihalyi Csikszentmihalyi, pretty famous guy, and he did a bunch of research over decades trying to figure out what activities people are doing when they're the most happy. What activities bring the most enjoyment? In order to find the answers to these questions, he did what's called an experience sampling measurement test. So basically what he did is he took one of these little buzzing devices, I forget what you call them, pages, took one of these pages and gave them to a bunch of individuals. And these individuals wore them throughout the day for a period of 2 weeks, except each day this buzzer would beep 8 times per day. And at each point when this buzzer went off, the participant would have to write down what activity they're doing and how they feel in that moment. So you can imagine a bunch of people walking about, going about their daily business, all of a sudden, and then having to fill out a bunch of questions. All in all, he got 100,000 data points from this research, which gave him a very good idea of what people were doing when they're the most happy. And it probably isn't what you think. So the big reveal, the high-level conclusion from this, is that people are the most happy when they enter a certain psychological state called flow. So the obvious question is, what is flow? Well, flow is a state that we can all get into as humans, and it basically means that everything is working in alignment with each other. So your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, they're all in alignment. You're focused on one thing such that everything is working together in harmony. The opposite to this is psychic entropy, and this is where you have, let's say, conflicts. So as an example, you might be watching TV, but at the same time as watching TV, you're feeling guilty about watching TV because you should be at the gym because you're out of shape and you've missed your gym session to watch TV. That's a perfect example of a conflict, and this is psychic entropy. So to reiterate, flow is when you don't have any of these conflicts and everything is in alignment. But at a deeper level, there are certain things that must be present if a flow state is to be achieved. So the first thing is that you have complete and utter engagement and concentration on what you're doing at that particular point in time. Everything, all your psychic energy, all your mental powers are consumed by this activity that you're doing, such that you can't focus on other things. So you kind of lose perception of reality because you're operating within this new reality of the activity that you're doing. So to make this clearer, let's give an example. Let's say tennis. If you're playing tennis and you're in a state of flow, then you're not hitting a shot and then kind of admiring the trees in the background or something like this. Instead, you're hitting a shot and you're so focused on the game, you're looking at your opponent, you're figuring out which direction he's going in and what angle of the racket that he's holding in his hand to try and anticipate where the ball's going to go next. You're just so focused on these things that nothing else can enter your mind space. You're not thinking, oh, I'm quite happy playing tennis. You kind of lose all self-consciousness like that because, again, you're just focused entirely on the game. The other key component to flow is you kind of lose your perception of time. So you get so wrapped up in this little world that you're living in at this point in time, like playing a game of tennis, that you'll go for an hour or 2 hours and it will feel like maybe 10 or 15 minutes has passed. Maybe you've been through this before where you're working on a piece of work and you just get so wrapped up in it that you kind of lose your perception of time. Maybe you miss lunch, for example. That's happened to me a few times. And then when you finish, you're like, wow, where did those 3 hours go? The two other key components of flow are that, one, you have control over what's happening, so you have control over the activity. So of course, if you're playing tennis, you're taking certain strokes, you're running around the court, you have control there. And the second thing is, it's intrinsically rewarding for you. So you're not, for instance, playing tennis to earn money or for some other extrinsic reward. You're playing tennis for the sheer enjoyment of playing tennis itself. So all of what I've just described there can be broken down into 6 key components. Number 1, intense concentration and engagement. Number 2, merging of action and awareness. Number 3, a loss of reflective self-consciousness. Number 4, lose sense of time. Number 5, personal control. Feel like you have control or agency. And number 6, it's intrinsically rewarding. Now, if all those 6 factors are present when you're doing an activity, then you're successfully in a state of flow. And that state is where we have the most satisfaction and the most enjoyment in our lives. So now we know how important flow is for having an engaging and enjoyable life. How do we get more of it? Well, there are certain activities that lend themselves really well to getting into a flow state. But it should just be said first, any activity can be conducive to a flow state. It kind of depends on the person doing the activity. In fact, it's a skill. There is a certain personality called an autotelic personality. And people who have this personality are able to make flow states out of pretty much any activity by doing certain things and manipulating their mind. And this is something that I'm not going to cover in this video, but I'm going to cover it in my next video about flow. So watch out for that one. So going back to which activities are more conducive to producing flow states, there are 4 critical points that need to be present if an activity is likely to get you into a state of flow. The first and arguably most important point is that the level of the task or activity needs to be on the edge of your ability. So it should be challenging for you. It should be at a level where you really have to focus to achieve it, but yet there is still potential of you achieving it, and you know that. It shouldn't be too easy, such that your mind's kind of wandering off in random directions because it's so automatic for you, such an easy task for you to do. Likewise, it shouldn't be so difficult such that you feel like it's hopeless. There's no point doing it because there's no way you'll ever achieve it. So let me give you an example. If you know how to drive and you're driving your car around the city, then that's an example of a task or activity that's pretty easy for you. It's automatic. Once you know how to drive, you kind of know how to control the vehicle. You don't really consciously have to think about turning the wheel and going left and going right and using your indicator. That's all kind of built into your brain at this point. So that would be an example of a task that's probably a little bit too low for you to be conducive for a flow state. But imagine you're in a racetrack and you're driving a car that's ridiculously powerful that you've never driven before. Let's say a McLaren P1. This kind of car is where you put your foot on the gas pedal and you kind of lose yourself. It's so flipping fast. And you're taking that around the Silverstone racetrack. Well, here is an example of something that would be at the edge of your ability, because you better believe that all your focus and all your engagement would be on the road ahead as you are driving this supercar around Silverstone. You'll be worrying about the speed that you're going, trying to hit the apex on the bends and, just controlling this beast of a machine. It would take all your focus and concentration. So that's a clear example of how kind of changing the level of the activity can make it more conducive to flow. Another example is climbing. Let's say you've been climbing for 5 years, so you're at a certain level of ability. Yet you go to your local climbing wall and you start climbing the easy wall. Well, it's going to be just automatic for you. It's going to be too easy for you. It's not enough for you to be fully focused and engaged on the wall that you're climbing. However, if they put you on the overhang route where you've got, I don't know, some really tricky handholds and stuff like that, then that perhaps would be more at the edge of your ability, and that would be more conducive to you getting into flow. Because to achieve that, to climb that wall, you really have to give it all your attention, all your focus. The second critical component is that you need to be able to get into a state of concentration. So you must be able to focus your mind on the activity that you're doing. And if you can't, then that is a significant barrier to getting into a flow state. Let's take the example of reading. If you're in the middle of a busy hall of people and you're trying to read a book, but you keep getting distracted by screaming kids running around you or maybe seagulls flying above you, then you're not likely going to get into a flow state because of that. Because your mind will just keep wandering off on various things. But if you're in a library, it's complete silence and you've got a good book in your hand, then you can focus on it and that will be more likely to get you into a state of flow. The third thing is clear goals and immediate feedback. Ideally, we need direction, so we need to know what we're trying to achieve, and that's where goals come in. We also need to have some feedback on how well we're doing. So an important part of this is that we need to try and improve. We need to try and get better and that's where feedback comes in. We need to know where we stand. A great example of this is bowling. If you're a good bowler and you're trying to reach a certain score and you're fully focused on getting that score, then you can very well get into a flow state when you go bowling. But imagine this, imagine if every time you threw the ball, there was a huge curtain in front of you so that you couldn't see how many pins you were knocking down after every throw. In essence, what I'm saying is you wouldn't get that feedback loop. You'd just be lobbing balls into the abyss and you wouldn't know how well you were bowling. This example where you don't get this feedback loop would be enough to severely hamper your chances of having flow. The final point is that you need to have a sense of control or agency. So it's really important that we feel that we have control over the activity that we're doing and that we're not just a bystander. If we're a bystander, then we realize that nothing we do really matters and our mind tends to wander. So that's not very conducive to a flow state. Whereas if we have control, then we have all these variables that we can play with, all these variables that we can manipulate to try and get a better result. Of course, that's very conducive to a state of flow. So to summarize, those activities that are prone to getting you into a state of flow are those that are on the edge of your ability, that allow you to get into a state of concentration, have clear goals and immediate feedback, and give you a sense of control. When all those four factors are met, then the activity is good for getting into a flow state. So given these four characteristics, which activities kind of exude these things in abundance such that they're likely to get us into a state of flow? Well, really, there's too many to list, because many skills, many activities that we do, they satisfy these requirements. For instance, chess, soccer, any kind of sport really, playing billiards, playing football, music, writing music, learning music, playing music in a band, listening to music, reading, philosophizing, computer programming, designing, art. I mean, the list just goes on, really. The key point to realize here is that if you're engaging in an activity where you're fully focused on it and you're living in that activity at that particular point in time, then you're going to be likely in a state of flow, if not approaching a state of flow. And what's more important here is that you're going to be enjoying yourself. So we've taken a lot of time to look at the kind of activities that we can ingrain into our lives to get us into a state of flow. But what about the opposite? What kind of activities are terrible for flow such that they're not very enjoyable for us? Well, Mihalyi Csikszentmihalyi found something very interesting. The very interesting thing he found is that what most of us consider social time in the modern day and age. So we finish our day at work and we come home, and what do? We sit in front of the TV or something like that. We veg on the couch. We just relax. Maybe we just browse through our phones and see whatever YouTube video takes our fancy, or browse on social media. You know, these are the exact kinds of activities that we don't really enjoy. That's what the experiencing sampling method found. People that were doing these kind of activities that I just talked about in this research that Csikszentmihalyi did reported themselves as being in a state of just slightly above depression while they were doing them. So even though we think we want to get home from work and grab a beer and sit in front of the TV, apparently what it seems like is that most of us don't actually enjoy that very much at all. When we're doing these activities, like let's say sitting in front of the TV, that doesn't fully consume all our mind space. It doesn't consume all our psychic energy to watch whatever's on that television. So our mind therefore tends to wander off in random directions like a wild monkey. All these thoughts, feelings and emotions pop up in our head just straight into our consciousness, and often they're at conflict with one another. So we'll be sat in front of the TV and all these lower emotions will be popping up. Maybe we'll be anxious, guilty, or feel some sense of pain. And that's what causes our displeasure. But when you're in a state of flow, these things don't have the ability to pop into your consciousness because there's nothing left, there's no space left because you're fully consumed in the activity that you're doing. So the reason I made this video and the kind of takeaway that I want to give you is really have a think about what's going on in your life. What activities do you have in your life? Do you have social activities? Do you have sports? Do you have skills that you're learning? Because it seems from this evidence that If we want to have an enjoyable life, we want to enjoy ourselves, then we need to have focused attention on things. Whether that's a skill, whether that's a sport, it doesn't really matter what it is, but we as humans really enjoy being focused and in harmony with ourselves. We don't like psychic entropy, we don't like conflicts, and those things tend to occur when we don't have focused attention. So if you don't have any activities in your life, you don't have any sports that you're pursuing, and you don't have any hobbies that you take seriously or anything like that, you're not learning anything new, and instead in your downtime you're just kind of vegging out and just kind of existing without any real mental focus, then realize that's probably not bringing you much happiness or enjoyment. And I suggest in this case for you to try and fill up your calendar with something, maybe a new skill, maybe a new hobby. Whatever it is for you, it doesn't really matter. Just choose something that you can really dig yourself into, dig your teeth into, and get in the zone. So in summary, Mihalyi Csikszentmihalyi taught us that flow is an optimal experience that brings us the most enjoyment out of anything in our lives. And we can achieve this state by engaging in activities, hobbies, skills, whatever, things that we can apply our full attention to. If we can engage in these kind of pursuits more in our life, that's going to make us happier, it's going to bring us more enjoyment, and overall we're just going to live better lives. In my next video, I want to talk about the other side of the flow experience. How can you as a person have a flow experience no matter what the situation, no matter what the activity, no matter what the external circumstances? How can you make a flow scenario or a flow state out of just being itself? I hope you liked this video. If you did, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you have any insights about this, or if this video kind of inspired you to take up a new skill or an activity, then write to me in the comments box below. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll speak to you soon.